Hello everyone. Okay, here we go. This is my first attempt at giving you an opportunity to listen and perhaps even rewind me for our lecture purposes. And so hopefully I'll be able to make this better as we go along. So today we are going to be talking about the beginnings of history. This is our first attempt at history. We see there, circle it real big. The idea of history being that we're talking about now a time period in which humans are writing, they are building large-scale settlements, they are leaving stuff behind. They are leaving things behind for us that we can look at, that we can read, and that can talk to us from 4,000 and 5,000 years ago. If we go on the conventional model of history, and we've talked about this a little bit in class already, we look at the original foundation of civilization, the places where we first kind of see it. It is in an area we call Mesopotamia. And if you look down here, as you see on the map, Mesopotamia is an area that is fairly big. You know, as you see, I'm given the big circle so I can outline it. We're looking at an area from modern-day Iraq and Iran. So, you know, that's that area over here. Okay, Iraq and Iran. And then it goes all the way through northern Saudi Arabia, stuff like that. Now we're up here. Here's Turkey. And then down into an area that here you see Phoenicia and Palestine. This modern day, that's Lebanon. And then over here, we've got Israel. Why do people stay here? Simple. First thing we need to survive is water. Without water, we're in trouble. Now, I know today we don't think of the Middle East as having a lot of water, but they had, in ancient times, really great rivers. And so those rivers provided lots of water that we needed. Now, on the flip side, there's not a lot of rain. I'm going to be showing you some pictures in a minute. You'll see it is still fairly dry. So the lack of rain, makes early humans in the Middle East learn irrigation. And irrigation is tremendously important, and we're going to be talking about that as we move on. Here is a picture of the Euphrates River. As you can see here, you got some palm trees and stuff like that, but other than that, it's pretty barren. Why? Once again, not a lot of rain. The Tigris, a little bit more well off, but despite that, you can see even some dry patches in this particular picture. So even though we have a lot of water, we're still going to have to work pretty hard for our crops. And our main crop, once again, is going to be, as you see in the background, our friend wheat. The group of people that we do call a civilization, even though they don't have writing and stuff like that, but we have found lots of settlements, we found cities, the people that we give the credit to domesticating wheat are our friends, the Natufians. I have mentioned them briefly in the first section, but the Natufians lived in modern-day Israel and Lebanon, okay, the Levant region of the Middle East, from the time period 12,500 BCE to 9,500 BCE. So you're looking at a time from 14,500 to about 11,500 years ago. This is where we think is the homeland of wheat. The wild wheat and barley and oats and things along that line, this is where we think it came from. We talked about this a little bit before, but again, I throw you the question, I want you to think about this. In the Middle East, this is where wheat naturally grew. So, early humans would be hunter-gatherers. They would come back to this spot year after year and notice that the grain was there. So eventually they decide to try to figure out and stay. We don't know why, we don't know how, we just know that they did. However, this leads me to this question. In the end, did we domesticate wheat, or did wheat domesticate us? Say there was no wheat. Say that didn't exist. Does any of this happen? In your notebooks, I want you to take a minute. I want you to write a few sentences about that. We're going to talk about this tomorrow, this concept. Did we domesticate agricultural products like wheat and barley, or did that actually domesticate us? Let's think about that. Now I'm going to keep moving on. You, of course, can pause this, but We know that everything was important to them, that farming was important to them, because most of their early tools that we find here, like sickles and mortars, that all has to do with grain, whether it's cutting grain with a sickle or grinding it up with a mortar. We think, for those of you who are dog lovers out there, it's either between Egypt or Sumeria where we see the first domestication of dogs. And of course, that is domesticating wolves, and one of the few animals that, if you remember from your reading over the summer, that indeed we domesticated. Interesting enough, and we talked about this before, trade, absolutely evident in this region. Why? Because we find things like stone and fish remains that are not native to this area. We think the stone came from Turkey. We think the fish came from the Nile. So these people are moving around. They're not in these little tiny villages where they never go out and they never walk around. We've got lots of trade. And as you can see here, you look at the map, this pinkish area, once again, big right here. This is the main area where we're finding. And you look at all these little dots. All these little dots are areas that we have found evidence of the Natufian culture. Pretty impressive. And here's an example of a city, as you see over here. We've got, hey, maybe this is a pig or something like that. Clearly a jug, but once again, all of this is pottery. We have stone and pottery, no metal yet. But then look here, look at this. This is a grave. You see this right here. And if you see how here's an arm that looks like it's placed under the head. You know, the hand would be over here. You see that the legs are bent. All right, and if you remember from the first thing, another question I want to talk to you about tomorrow, this body is clearly arranged. This body is put into a grave. So if we have bodies that are arranged and bodies that are in a grave, what does that tell us? What is the belief that, based on our modern world, what do we think these people believed in? Or what was the overall purpose of burying a body and arranging it so nicely? Okay, now we go to our first group that we really want to call the civilization. A group that is sedentary, they are in one spot, they have a lot of similarities amongst themselves, and we refer to them as the Sumerians. The Sumerians are based in an area that is known as Sumer. Okay, and Sumer is really one of their oldest cities, so that's why we give it the name. They didn't necessarily call themselves Sumerian. That's our interpretation. The group of people, we refer to them as being Semitic, and that is based on their languages. Their languages are the same. So you have people that are Sumerian, and the Hebrews and the Akkadians and the Phoenicians, whereas like modern day, they would speak languages like Arabic, Hebrew, and a number of dialects in North Africa. Now, when you get a bunch of people in an area, you have to form a government. Because if you had everybody doing anything they want, you need a government. And we kind of touched on this a little bit before. But the government that was present here is something that is known as a city-state. Here's the basic concept of a city-state government. What you have is a city. And if you look down here, the names of some of their cities, not quite the same as ours today, but, right down here, you've got Eridu, Uruk, Lagash, Nippur, Kish. These are just a name, and there was many more cities. But what you had was you had the king at the top, who was known as a big man, who ran with complete power. Whatever he said went, and he was supported by the priests. We're going to talk about this. Religion is going to be very, very important in this area. The priests would have a lot of power, and everybody would have to listen to them. The government officials that existed, their job was to carry out what the king told them to do. But a city-state, you can only get so big. What you basically have is a city where the government and some people lived, and a surrounding area of farmland where you grew all your food. But you could only get as big as you could protect. And back then, you might have an army that's just a couple thousand people. We're not talking about gigantic groups here. So for the most part, everything was very small, very simple, everything divided by cities. So if you ask someone who they wouldn't necessarily say that they were a Sumerian. They would say they were from Uruk or Ur. They would not necessarily see themselves as a unified people. And again, the area that we're talking about here with the Sumerians is right down this area here. Okay, you see Sumer, Eridu, Ur, this is the area. So this is really modern day Iraq, a little bit of Iran, and right down here is modern day Kuwait. As I mentioned before, religion is crucial here. That's why the priests were so important. And we know that it's important to them. We don't have a lot of religious writings, but the biggest building in every single city, every single one, guys, this is without fail, was known as a ziggurat. Let me jump here. There is a picture of a ziggurat. As you can see, it was quite large. All right, and if you're someone that's living 5,000 years ago, this is the biggest thing you would ever see, and it would be impressive and just incredible. Down here below is a relief sculpture. A relief is just a carving, really, of people giving sacrifices to a god. Now, if I hop back here, the whole idea is that these buildings do still exist, and the Sumerians had a pretty bleak view of the afterlife and their gods. They believed in lots of gods, and their gods had to be, prayed to quite a bit, and they would sacrifice things like animals and stuff like that. But here's what's so crucial, is that they were not particularly nice. They would send floods, they would send disease or famines or droughts, and so you had to really pray to them, but these were gods that you feared. You didn't necessarily love them a lot. They were to be feared. And we can see that even deeper in the view of their afterlife. The Sumerians are a group of people that, when they write about their religion, they do believe in an afterlife. But it's pretty sad, really. You just go to a house of dust and clay. So for the rest of your life, you're just kind of sitting there in darkness, sneezing if you have allergies. But it's pretty bleak. But here's another question I want you to write down, and I want you to answer this, and we'll talk about it again tomorrow. If a view of an afterlife as bleak as this, there's no paradise, there's no heaven and no hell, everybody goes to this underworld, if you will, it's full of darkness and dust and clay. If that's the afterlife, tell me what life was like. Tell me what their day-to-day lives were. Tell me what their outlook on life was. Again, based on what I just told you, that you had these scary gods, they were all powerful, they could destroy you. And even if they didn't destroy you, when you died naturally, you went to a land of darkness and dust. And let's think about what that tells us.